that 4 sitting members of Congress should, quote, go back to their own country when he has authorized raids without warrants on thousands of families across this country. I am not surprised that he uses the rhetoric that he does when he violates international human rights and takes thousands of children away from their families. I am not surprised that he has turned our public education system under the leadership of Betsy DeVos into a cash cow to enrich himself and his friends. Are you also aware that when a formerly incarcerated person is homeless, there's a 60% chance that they will be rearrested? But if that same person has access to housing, the percentage drops to 29%.
Housing is one of the factors that is beneficial.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. You just caught that clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doing what she's known for, putting on a show. Honestly, it feels less like a serious press briefing and more like a dramatic performance, doesn't it? Today, we're breaking down a classic face-off that doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves. On one side, you've got the squad's leading voice trying to land a gotcha moment. On the other, one of the most accomplished minds in the country, Ben Carson. And let me tell you, watching this exchange, it's like seeing someone step into a game they're just not ready for. While the squad often leans into outrage and sharp rhetoric, Carson brings a completely different approach. He stays calm, measured, and methodical. Never rushing, I'm never rattled. What makes this especially interesting is how he responds. Instead of getting pulled into emotional back and forth, he sticks to facts and lets the arguments speak for themselves. And in doing so, he often allows his opponents to stumble over their own points. We're about to dive into the hearing where she attempts to challenge him on HUD policies. So buckle up. This is a breakdown of how a high-pressure political exchange really unfolds.
Stated, quote, the war on poverty sometimes conflicted with the war on drugs, which often dealt harshly with nonviolent offenders, taking men away from their families and disproportionately affecting minority communities. Are these your words?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that the war on drugs disproportionately impacted Black communities and communities of color, despite marijuana and other drug use levels being comparable to white communities?
Traditionally, that has been the case.
And I see here, are you also aware that when a formerly incarcerated person is homeless, there's a 60% chance that they will be rearrested? But if that same person has access to housing, the percentage drops to 29%.
Housing is one of the factors that is beneficial in preventing recidivism.
Mm-hmm. I'm concerned here that the war on drugs has not been solely limited to incarceration, and that the negative impact of the war on drugs has not been limited to incarceration. But also we had legislated rippling effects that also seems to have been codified in our housing system. Are you aware of HUD's one-strike rule, which evicts tenants for a single incidence of criminal activity, no matter how minor, with no holistic review?
There is the ability of local jurisdictions to alter that rule.
Mm-hmm. But federally, this provision still persists, correct?
As far as I know, it's still intact.
Mm-hmm. And so a person could be stop and frisked and be found in possession of a small amount of marijuana and then be evicted or have their entire family evicted from public housing?
That is a possibility.
Are you aware that owners and public housing authorities can subject tenants to tests for alcohol and drugs?
They can require that, yes.
Mm-hmm. And I see here that we also have no-fault policies where an entire family can be evicted for the criminal activity of a guest of the household, even without the knowledge of anyone in that household. Are you aware of that provision as well?
The use of such activity is extremely limited, if ever used.
Mm-hmm. But they are still codified in federal law, correct?
Is it on the federal books? As far as I know, it's been on the books for many, many years.
Mm-hmm. Do you support reversing some of these provisions?
Do I prevent which provisions?
Say the no-fault policy.
I can talk about that on individual cases if you have an example that you want to talk about.
Well, I'd say, would you support being able to move some of these policies over to a more holistic review? You know, you yourself asked for case-by-case consideration. Should that case-by-case consideration be codified in federal law instead of having blanket one-strike or no-fault policies?
I'm always in favor of more flexibility.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Secretary Carson. I'd also like to highlight there's been much talk about the issue with NYCHA and public housing, and it's horrifying, the conditions that are happening in NYCHA. It's horrifying that people are living through winter without heat, opening their ovens to try to make sure that they're able to sleep through the night. But I think it's important to notice that this is not about throwing more money to the problem. This is about throwing the money at the problem. NYCHA and public housing across the country has been starved by members of Congress for over 15 years. And that deficit has built up for many, many years, which has led to, in New York City alone, a $32 billion price tag to make sure that we get people basic heat, hot water, and so on. And I don't think that, no matter what policy changes we make, you can't take food away from a child and then not understand why they can't or don't eat. And I think that that's exactly what's happening with our public housing program. Chairwoman, I would like to seek unanimous consent to submit to the record a New York Times article on what it would take to fix New York's public housing.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to make of note that the provisions that we wanted to reverse, including one strike and no fault policies, are being introduced in our bill on the Fair Chance at Housing Act. Thank you very much.
Full video playback of Clip 1 and Clip 2 plays here. Part 2, main reaction and breakdown. Host, man, is it just me, or is that contrast absolutely impossible to ignore? Let's start with that hearing. You've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sitting there with prepared binders, trying to press Ben Carson on the one-strike rule and public housing policy. But she's clearly aiming to frame these policies as targeted attacks on minority communities. But look at Carson's reaction. Completely calm, totally unfazed, and there's a reason for that. He understands the history behind these policies. Many of them weren't newly created. They've been around for decades, passed under different administrations, including ones led by the same party AOC aligns with. Now here's where the real divide shows up. AOC and her allies often talk about compassion, but their critics argue that this approach can lead to long-term dependency rather than long-term solutions. In this case, the debate centers on public housing safety versus policy flexibility. Think about the core issue. Should housing authorities have strict rules about criminal activity? Or should there be more leniency to avoid displacing individuals and families? Carson's stance emphasizes safety for residents, families who rely on stable, secure housing. Meanwhile, AOC's perspective focuses more on avoiding harsh penalties that could disproportionately impact vulnerable communities. That's a fundamental philosophical difference. Then we move to the rally clip. This is where Carson shifts from defense to a more direct critique, still measured, but more pointed. He raises the argument that no group should be expected to think or vote a certain way based on identity alone. It's a controversial statement, but one that resonates strongly with his supporters. At the same time, his critics would argue that systemic factors still play a major role in shaping outcomes and opportunities, so this is where the broader national debate really heats up. Carson also highlights specific policies tied to the Trump administration, things like HBCU funding, opportunity zones, and the First Step Act. Supporters see these as concrete achievements with measurable impact, while critics debate how effective or far-reaching they truly were. And that's really the takeaway here. Two completely different frameworks for looking at the same issues. On one side, a focus on systemic reform and social equity. On the other, an emphasis on individual responsibility and policy outcomes. No matter where you land politically, exchanges like this highlight just how deep those divides go. and why these hearings get so much attention. So, what do you think? Are perspectives like those of the squad gaining traction or losing influence in the bigger picture? Drop your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed the breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I'll catch you in the next one.